The story of a teenager imprisoned for life who became a European phenomenon, then mysteriously murdered. On the 26th of May, 1828, a teenager, around 16 years old, suddenly appeared in Nuremberg. He walked as if he had never known the ground, spoke as if he had never heard anyone speak, and in his hand he held a letter, signed by someone nameless. He claimed that throughout his life, he had only seen 4 walls. No light, no people, no language. The people shouted, "Monster! Who left him here?" But only a few years later, that child who couldn't speak had become the center of all Europe. This is the story of Kaspar Hauser, the child of Europe, a pure soul, stained by the world. In the afternoon of the 26th of May, 1828, a quiet Pentecost Monday in the city of Nuremberg, Bavaria, a strange scene occurred on Unschlittplatz Square, where the city stored fat and grease for industrial activities. George Weichmann, a local shoemaker, was standing outside his house when he saw a teenager dressed in ragged clothes, boots so worn that his feet were sticking out, skin scraped and bruised. The boy, about 16 to 17 years old, walked unsteadily, like a child taking his first steps in life. The daylight seemed to bother him. His eyes squinted as if he had never been accustomed to sunlight. When Weichmann approached, the teenager only grunted and handed him a letter. The envelope was addressed to Captain von Wessenig, commander of the 4th Cavalry Squadron of the 6th Regiment stationed in Nuremberg. Weichmann, with the kindness of a city dweller, decided to lead the boy to the correct address. Along the way, he tried to talk to the boy. But the teenager's vocabulary was astonishing. Only a few simple sentences repeated like a machine. "I want to become a valiant cavalryman like my father." And horse, horse. Any other questions only received the response, "Don't know," or pitiful cries. At Captain von Wessenig's house, they opened the letter to read. The content stunned everyone. The letter had no signature, written in a strange tone, stating that the writer had adopted the boy since the 7th of October, 1812, when he was just an infant. The writer said he had taught him to read, write, and Christian doctrine, but never allowed him to take a single step out of the house. Now, that person could no longer care for him and wanted him to join the cavalry like his birth father, who had passed away. The second letter, supposedly written by his mother, confirmed his name as Kaspar Hauser, born on the 30th of April, 1812, and his father as a deceased cavalry officer. But something was off. Handwriting experts later analyzed and concluded that both letters were written by the same person, and very likely Kaspar Hauser himself. Especially, the letter had the sentence, "He writes exactly like my handwriting," a clue suggesting the writer and the subject might be one and the same. Von Wessenig, not knowing what to do with this strange teenager, took him to the police station. There, when asked to sign the report, Kaspar Hauser unexpectedly grabbed the quill and wrote his name clearly and proficiently, a detail completely contradicting the image of an uneducated person. He seemed familiar with money, could read a little, and could recite a few prayers. That night, Kaspar Hauser was detained in the Lugensland Tower of Nuremberg Castle as a vagrant. But this was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning of one of the greatest mysteries of the 19th century, a story that would shake all of Europe and leave a profound mark on history, literature, psychology, and philosophy. In the first weeks of detention in the castle tower, Kaspar Hauser gradually began to learn to speak. Word by word, sentence by sentence, he told of a life that few could believe, a life in absolute darkness. According to Kaspar's account, from the time he became conscious until he was released, he had lived in a pitch-black, cramped room where he couldn't stand straight or lie flat. The room's dimensions were about 2 meters long, 1 meter wide, and about 1.5 meters high, a space just enough to sit or curl up. The floor was dirt, the ceiling low wood. He slept on a pile of straw, wearing pants with a hole so he could defecate without leaving his spot. The thought of standing up never occurred to me, Kaspar later recalled, because I couldn't. His food was bread and water, placed beside him twice a day by someone he never saw. That person moved in absolute silence. Kaspar heard no footsteps, no voice, no animal sounds or any noises from outside life. He didn't know day from night, didn't know how time passed. His only toys were 2 wooden horses and a wooden dog, primitive toys without color in absolute darkness. He didn't know what colors were, what complex sounds were, or even what people looked like. Occasionally, his captor mixed something into his drinking water that made him sleep deeply. When he woke, he noticed his hair and nails had been trimmed. This was the only time the captor touched him. Then one day, everything changed. The mysterious man appeared, this time not hiding his presence. He began teaching Kaspar to stand, to walk. His legs, after more than a decade of improper use, were weak and trembling. He taught him the sentence about wanting to become a cavalryman, taught him to write his name. And then, in late May 1828, the man led him out of the dark room for the first time in his life, brought him to the surface, placed 2 letters in his hand, and abandoned him in the city of Nuremberg. Kaspar Hauser, 16 years old, had stepped into a world he didn't know existed. Andreas Hiltel, the jailer responsible for watching Kaspar in the early months, was the first to notice something unusual about this teenager. Unlike ordinary vagrants, Kaspar exhibited strange characteristics that couldn't be explained. First, his physical condition was surprisingly good. Despite the horrific imprisonment story, Kaspar was not emaciated or malnourished. He walked healthily, and this made many doubt the authenticity of his story. Second, his diet was bizarre to the point of unbelievability. Kaspar completely refused all food except black bread and plain water. When given meat, vegetables, or any other food, he felt nauseous and vomited. He also refused beer, wine, common drinks in Bavaria at the time. Only after many months did he gradually begin to accept other types of food. Third, his senses developed in strange ways. His eyes were extremely sensitive to light, to the point that during the day he had to cover them. However, he could see clearly in the dark, an ability that amazed many. His sense of smell was unusually acute, able to distinguish scents from far away. But he had almost no sense of space, couldn't distinguish far from near, and thought everything was on the same plane. When Mayor Binder decided to publicize Kaspar's story, a wave of curiosity flooded Nuremberg. Hundreds of people crowded at the bars of the castle tower to see the Child of Nuremberg, a nickname quickly given to him. They wanted to see this wild boy with their own eyes. Those who saw Kaspar had mixed reactions. Some felt pity and sorrow for his terrible fate. Others doubted, thinking it was an elaborate hoax. "This is a faker," many said. "No one could survive such imprisonment." News of Kaspar Hauser quickly spread beyond Nuremberg. Newspapers in Munich, Frankfurt, Vienna, Paris, and even London reported on this wild boy. Scholars, philosophers, scientists, and nobility all took interest in the case. Why? Because Kaspar Hauser represented a fundamental philosophical question that the Enlightenment era had posed. What is a human born like without society, without language, without culture? Kaspar was a living tabula rasa, a natural experiment on nature versus nurture. The nobility and wealthy began donating money for Kaspar's care and education. And in July 1828, Kaspar Hauser was officially adopted by the city of Nuremberg, becoming the child of an entire city. At this point, one of the most important figures in Kaspar Hauser's story appeared: Paul Johann Anselm Ritter von Feuerbach. Von Feuerbach was a famous jurist, president of the Bavarian Court of Appeals, and the reformer of the Bavarian criminal code, abolishing torture and becoming a model for many other countries. He proposed the famous legal maxim, Nullum crimen, nulla poena sine praevia lege poenali. No crime, therefore, no punishment without a prior criminal law. Upon hearing of Kaspar Hauser, von Feuerbach personally went to the castle tower to meet him. The encounter moved him so deeply that he decided to write a biography about him and investigate his true origins. His book, published in 1832, titled Kaspar Hauser, An Example of a Crime Against the Human Soul, became the foundational text on the case and has never gone out of print in Germany. Von Feuerbach arranged for Kaspar to be moved from the castle tower to the home of Georg Friedrich Daumer, a professor and speculative philosopher in Nuremberg, who had been a tutor to the children of the great philosopher Hegel. Georg Friedrich Daumer was a gentle, educated man with astonishing patience. He spent many hours each day teaching Kaspar, and what he discovered amazed him and all of Europe. Kaspar learned at an extraordinary speed. Within a few weeks, his vocabulary expanded from a few dozen words to hundreds. He learned to read and write at a pace Daumer had never seen in any student. In particular, he showed phenomenal memory, able to recall exactly what he had read or heard after just one time. But most notable was Kaspar's unexpected artistic talents. He had a special knack for drawing, creating paintings with astonishing accuracy and detail, though never formally taught. He also learned to play piano and chess, quickly becoming proficient in both. Daumer also discovered Kaspar's strange psychological traits. He exhibited a philosophical naivety, a completely fresh way of seeing the world, untainted by prejudices and social habits. When asked about the difference between men and women, he replied, "Women wear skirts, men don't." When asked about rich and poor, he didn't understand why some had much, while others had nothing. This fascinated many philosophers and thinkers of the time. Kaspar seemed like the natural man Rousseau had written about, a pure soul not corrupted by society. However, Daumer also conducted more peculiar experiments. He believed in animal magnetism, a popular pseudoscience theory at the time. Von Feuerbach later wrote, "When Professor Daumer placed the north pole of the magnet towards him, Kaspar put his hand on the stomach area, pulled out his vest, and said that it pulled him like that, and a stream of air seemed to escape from him. The south pole affected him less strongly, and he said that it blew into him." Though these experiments seem bizarre today, they show the level of scientific interest and study Kaspar received. Kaspar's life with Daumer was difficult, but also the happiest in his short life. He lived in a warm home, treated with kindness, and for the first time experienced things most take for granted: sunlight, the smell of flowers, birdsong, and most importantly, human affection. But this happiness would not last. On the 17th of October, 1829, a terrifying event occurred that shocked all of Nuremberg. Kaspar was found in the basement of Daumer's house, blood flowing from a deep wound on his forehead. When he could speak, he recounted that while sitting in the outhouse, a man with a hooded hat had appeared and attacked him. Before striking, the man said, "You still have to die before leaving the city of Nuremberg." Even more frightening, Kaspar claimed he recognized the attacker's voice. It was the man who brought him to Nuremberg in 1828, his captor, whom he had never seen but had heard for 16 years. Blood trails showed Kaspar first ran to the first floor of the house, then down to the basement and hid through a trap door. The police were summoned but found no trace of an intruder. No footprints, no evidence of entry. This raised suspicions. Skeptics, and there were increasingly many, claimed Kaspar self-inflicted the wound. They argued he cut himself with a razor, then hid it on the first floor before going to the basement. The motive? To gain sympathy and continue receiving attention. As early as 1829, a year after Kaspar appeared, a bold theory began to circulate. Kaspar Hauser was the stolen Prince of Baden. The story goes, on the 29th of September 1812, Stephanie de Beauharnais, a princess adopted by Napoleon and wife of Grand Duke Karl of Baden, gave birth to a son, the legitimate heir to Baden. But just 2 weeks later, on October 16, the palace announced the child had died. But according to this theory, the child didn't die. Countess von Hochberg, the Grand Duke's second morganatic wife, orchestrated a plot to steal the child and replace him with a dying baby. The purpose, so her son, Leopold, could inherit the throne of Baden. The real child, the Prince of Baden, was kept imprisoned in a dark dungeon for 16 years. That was Kaspar Hauser. Evidence presented. 1. Timing matches. Kaspar claimed his birth date as the 30th of April 1812, only a few months from the Prince of Baden's. 2. Similar appearance. Some noted Kaspar had features resembling the Baden family. 3. Motive for murder. If Kaspar was truly the prince, those in power had strong motive to silence him. 4. Anonymous letter. The writer of the letters Kaspar carried seemed to hide his true identity. 5. Court silence. The investigation into Kaspar's death was not thorough, as if someone was covering up. This theory became so popular that European press called Kaspar the Child of Europe and the Lost Prince. Writers, artists, and intellectuals were captivated by the tragic story of a prince stolen in infancy. However, the theory has weaknesses. Rejection from official records. In 1876, Otto Mittelstadt published official documents on the emergency baptism, autopsy, and burial of the Prince of Baden. According to these, the prince's father, grandmother, aunt, along with 10 court physicians, nurses, and others, all saw the prince's body. Historian Andrew Lang wrote, "It is absurd to suppose, without any evidence, that all of them were involved in the conspiracy." Modern scientific analysis. In 1996, a study attempted to analyze DNA from bloodstains on pants believed to be Kaspar's. Results compared to Baden descendants showed no relation. In 2002, another study analyzed hair and body cells from Kaspar's clothes. Results did not fully exclude relation, but also didn't confirm. In 2024, a final scientific study compared the mitochondrial DNA haplotype of Kaspar with the House of Baden, completely excluding the possibility Kaspar was the prince with 99.9994% certainty. But even with science debunking the royal theory, its allure remains. Because it's not just about DNA, but about power, conspiracy, and how the powerful can do anything to retain their power. If Kaspar wasn't the Prince of Baden, who was he? Researchers have proposed many other theories. 1. The fraud theory. Some scholars, especially psychiatrists like Karl Leonhard, 1970, claim Kaspar was a pathological liar. Leonhard wrote, "If he had really lived in the conditions he described from childhood, he would not have developed beyond the state of an idiot. In fact, he would not have survived long." His story is full of absurdities to the point that it is astonishing it was believed and still is by many. Supporters point out, Kaspar's story has many contradictions. The 2 letters he carried were clearly written by the same person, perhaps Kaspar himself. The attacks show signs of staging. A 2023 study shows Kaspar had a smallpox. Vaccination scar. Impossible if imprisoned from infancy, as vaccination required going to a medical station with an adult. However, this theory struggles to explain. Why would a young person spend 5 years playing the role of an imprisoned person, enduring constant doubt and scrutiny, and ultimately die from a self-inflicted wound, if so? 2. Munchausen syndrome theory. Some modern doctors suggest Kaspar may have had Munchausen syndrome, a psychological disorder causing patients to intentionally injure or sicken themselves for attention and sympathy. This could explain the attacks and self-inflicted wounds, but it doesn't explain Kaspar's origins or why his imprisonment story was so detailed. 3. Real victim theory. Some scholars still believe Kaspar was truly imprisoned, but not for royal reasons. He may have been an illegitimate child of a noble or wealthy family, hidden due to shame. Or he could have been a victim of a psychopath wanting to conduct an experiment on human development. This is supported by Kaspar's strange psychological and physiological traits, hard to fully fake, findings about his brain in the autopsy, the fact that no one has found his true identity after 2 centuries. Whatever the truth about Kaspar Hauser, the impact of his story on European culture and science is undeniable. In psychology and education, Kaspar's case became a classic study of feral children, children raised in isolation or without human contact. His story is compared to others like Victor of Aveyron, 1800, a boy found living in the woods in France, unable to speak; Jeannie, 1970, an American girl imprisoned and abused for 13 years. These cases helped scientists understand critical periods in language and cognitive development. They show that if a child is deprived of language and social stimulation in early years, their development is severely and permanently affected. In medicine, Kaspar Hauser syndrome is named for stunted growth and delayed development due to lack of psychosocial stimulation, now called psychosocial dwarfism. In literature and art, Kaspar Hauser became a powerful symbol in European literature and art, representing destroyed innocence, a pure soul corrupted by the world, the outsider, one who doesn't belong, viewing society from outside, victim of power, crushed by the powerful, notable works about Kaspar Hauser. 1. Kaspar Hauser lied. Kaspar Hauser Song by Georg Trakl, 1913. A poem cited by philosopher Martin Heidegger in his language studies. 2. Kaspar by Peter Handke, 1967. A play portraying Kaspar as an innocent destroyed by society through imposed language and rational values. 3. The Enigma of Kaspar Hauser. Gederversichung Gott gegen Eli by Werner Herzog, 1974. A classic of German cinema, with Bruno S. as Kaspar. Bruno S. himself had an abused childhood and time in mental institutions, leading Herzog to see him as similar to Kaspar. 4. Wooden Horse, Kaspar Hauser's Song, by Suzanne Vega, 1987. A song based on her perception of Kaspar's experience emerging from the dark dungeon. 5. Kaspar, animated film by Diane Obamsawin, 2012, adapted from her own graphic novel. In all these works, Kaspar is depicted not just as an individual victim, but as a symbol for the human tragedy in modern society, loss of innocence, alienation, and the cruel power of social structures. In philosophy, Kaspar Hauser became central to the debate on nature versus nurture, one of the most basic questions in philosophy and psychology. Enlightenment philosophers like Rousseau asked, "What is a human born like before being shaped by society?" Kaspar seemed a living answer, a natural man in the form of a teenager. But Kaspar's story also shows the answer isn't simple. A child deprived of social stimulation isn't a noble savage, but a psychologically and developmentally devastated person. Kaspar Hauser was buried in the Stadtfriedhof Cemetery in Ansbach. His gravestone is inscribed in Latin, Hic occultus occulto occisus. Here lies a mysterious one, killed in a mysterious way. And Hic jacet Kaspar Hauser, enigma sui temporis, ignota nativitas, occulta mors, 1833. Here lies Kaspar Hauser, enigma of his time. Unknown birth, occult death. 1833. Later, another monument was erected in Hofgarten Park, where Kaspar was fatally wounded. These two stone monuments not only mark a person's resting place, but symbolize an unsolved mystery. In over 200 years since Kaspar appeared on Nuremberg streets, more than 3,000 books and 14,000 articles have been written about him. Scientists, historians, philosophers, writers, artists, and mystery enthusiasts have all tried to decode Kaspar Hauser's puzzle. But perhaps, as Werner Herzog said in his film, the important thing isn't finding the answer, but understanding that some questions, some mysteries, forever have no solution. Today, with all advances in forensic science and DNA analysis, we can assert with high certainty that Kaspar Hauser was not the Prince of Baden. Studies in 2023 to 2024 also seriously question the authenticity of his imprisonment story. It's possible Kaspar Hauser was a young person with psychological disorder, perhaps Munchausen syndrome or another pathology, who created a complex story of imprisonment and then got caught in his own lie, unable to escape. Or, perhaps, as some still believe, he was truly a victim of a horrific crime. A child imprisoned for reasons we'll never know, by people we'll never identify. But regardless of the truth, Kaspar Hauser's story is a profound tragedy. If he was a fraud, it's the tragedy of a young person with untreated psychological disorder, alternately glorified and doubted by society, ultimately dying in loneliness and despair. If he was a real victim, it's the tragedy of a child deprived of childhood, given a brief chance at freedom and happiness, then murdered by those wanting to keep their secrets. In either case, Kaspar Hauser is a victim of cruelty, whether individual or societal. And that's why his story still moves us today. Because it's not just a historical mystery, but a question about human nature, about how we treat those who are different, vulnerable, voiceless. Kaspar Hauser, whether prince or vagrant, victim or fraud, is a mirror reflecting society. And what we see in that mirror isn't always comfortable. As von Feuerbach wrote in his 1832 biography, this is not just the story of an imprisoned child. This is the story of a crime against the human soul, the crime of isolation, the crime of doubt, the crime of distrust. Today, over 190 years after Kaspar's death, we still don't know who he was. But perhaps the more important question isn't who was Kaspar Hauser, but how did we treat him? And the answer to that question, though painful, is clear. We turned him into a phenomenon, an object of curiosity, a mystery to solve. We glorified, then doubted him. We promised him a future, then took away his hope. And finally, we let him die alone, in blood and pain, in a cold park on a winter day. That is the real tragedy of Kaspar Hauser, not the mystery of his identity, not the question of royalty or fraud, but how a society, civilized, enlightened, progressive, could completely fail to protect a vulnerable young person. And that's why Kaspar Hauser's story still holds meaning today. Because Kaspar Hauser still exist, isolated, abused, abandoned children, and how we treat them reflects who we truly are. On his gravestone in Ansbach, below the line about the mystery, is another line few notice, 1833. Just a number, just a year. But it reminds us that behind every mystery, every legend, is a real person, one who lived, suffered, and died. And that person deserves to be remembered not just as an unsolved enigma, but as a human, with all the complexity, suffering, and humanity of a person. In recent years, researchers continue to analyze the Kaspar Hauser case with modern methods. In 2023, a study discovered a smallpox vaccination scar on the body believed to be Kaspar's, a clue showing he had contact with the outside world before appearing in Nuremberg. In 2024, final mitochondrial DNA analysis completely excluded the possibility Kaspar was the Prince of Baden. But even as science debunks some theories, the core mystery remains. Who was Kaspar Hauser? Where did he come from? And what really happened in Hofgarten Park on the 14th of December, 1833? Perhaps we'll never know. And perhaps that's what makes this story forever haunting us.